When studying our government, it's important to understand where our government gets its power from and what type of power our government has. We're going to focus on Congress for this video and look at the three types of power that Congress has. The easiest type of power to understand is expressed powers. These are powers that are specifically listed in the U.S. Constitution. They're listed in Article 1, Section 8. Article 1 created Congress and sets out the rules of how Congress works. Section 8 lists 27 expressed powers that Congress has. An example of this is Congress has the power to declare war, the power to raise money through taxation, and lots of other powers. So if you want to review that section of the Constitution, you can see more of those. Implied powers are a little more controversial. There's been debate over what implied powers Congress actually has or what they should have. These are powers suggested by the Constitution. There's something in Article 1, Section 8 that's called the Necessary and Proper Clause, or often sometimes called the Elastic Clause, because it has been stretched out like elastic would be. And these powers are powers that, okay, we're going to look at the expressed powers given to Congress, and these suggest that in order to carry out those expressed powers, we also need to have some implied powers. An example of this is that the Constitution doesn't specifically say Congress has the power to establish a national minimum wage, but it has been read from the Constitution, pulled from the Constitution, that if Congress has an expressed power to regulate commerce, then the national minimum wage would fall under that. And so the Supreme Court over time has decided and interpreted that to mean that Congress does have this power to set a national minimum wage, even though it's not specifically listed. The final type of power that Congress has are inherent powers. These are powers that Congress has just because it's part of our national government. This says that national governments just have some powers by the fact that they are a national government. These would be the power to control the country's borders, the power to gain new territory through expansion, the power to defend itself against revolution. These are just assumed to be powers that a government has just by the fact that it is a government. I often compare this to, if you think of government as being a parent, inherent powers are kind of like the because I said so powers, because the parent just has that power because they are a parent. They have certain powers. But then we get into the debate, okay, beyond the expressed powers, how much power should our government have? And this has led to a debate since the beginning of our country. On one side, you have strict constructionists, and these kind of line up with people who were also maybe anti-federalists, who didn't like all the powers that the Constitution was giving to the federal government. Strict constructionists would say that government should really only have the powers specifically listed in the Constitution, that government should really stick to only the expressed powers. Implied powers, according to a strict constructionist, implied powers should really not exist or be extremely limited in scope. The government should err on the side of thinking that, okay, I do not have this power because it is not in the Constitution, rather than assuming powers and believing that they have lots of implied powers. Thomas Jefferson was a famous person early on in the strict constructionist view. Cough, cough, except for that whole when he became president and did things like the Louisiana Purchase, which aren't really express powers in the Constitution. When he became president, his views may have shifted a little bit once he had the control of the government. On the other side, you have liberal constructionists. This would be those who argue that government needs these implied powers in order to function. If you only go by the very small list of expressed powers in the Constitution, our government would not really be able to function and do the things it needs to do, like protect our natural rights, as part of that whole social contract thing. The Constitution, obviously can't list every single specific power that Congress needs to do its job. Liberal constructionists would say that's why the Necessary and Proper Clause was put in there. It was to cover their bases, to say, here's some specific powers we want to make sure Congress has, and then we also want to make sure they have the power to carry those out and pass law, anything that is necessary and proper to carry out those powers. Liberal constructionists would say, look, we made a mistake with the Articles of Confederation. We really limited our federal government too much, and that created chaos, and we almost fell apart as a country. And so they would say, we need to have these implied powers so we don't run into that problem again. One of the famous people on the liberal constructionist side would be Alexander Hamilton, who greatly expanded power of the federal government as the Secretary of Treasury and argued that we need those implied powers. No one is perfectly in one side or the other, though. As I mentioned, Jefferson became more of a liberal constructionist as he was president and realized he needed certain powers, and Congress needed certain powers to get things done that he wanted to accomplish. And Hamilton wasn't for the government just having unlimited power at all times. So no one's perfectly in one camp or another, but this is that debate that goes on and really still goes on today. So hopefully this has helped clear that up a little bit. If you do have any questions about powers of Congress or these different types of constructionists, be sure to reach out to your government teacher.